Hey, what's up everyone? I wanted to make this video about my design workflow with Webflow app and just a little bit about how I go from Sketch to Webflow. I've been using Webflow for a couple months now. I've only a couple months now, maybe 2 or 3. And the past 3 or 4 websites I've made have been in Webflow. So the way I normally get started is design it in Sketch. Now, Webflow uses a 12 column grid like this. So it sort of helps to make the same thing in Sketch like this so that you can roughly align the elements so that it looks similar once you start developing it in Webflow. So what I normally do is get started with the design, make one for desktop, make the same thing for mobile. And once, there's a client approval, I get that done, I get started in Webflow. So the thing with Webflow is it's a web development tool in the same way that Sketch is a web design tool. So while it makes everything easy for you, you still have to know sort of the base of how Webflow works. And by that I mean there's a there's fixed sections that sort of play together. And as you use Webflow, you realize you have to do it in a particular way. So the best way to do that is just to watch their tutorials. It's about, I guess you can just get started with the first 30 minutes of tutorials and then you can figure out the rest as you go along. So for example, there's sections, containers, and columns. So you always normally start with a container, then you create a section within it, then you create columns, and then you start adding elements to this. So as an example here, this is the section, and I can see my code here. So I've created this row with, I can set widths this way. And this is exactly why I said it helps to have a 12 column grid even when you design, because then you know exactly how much it should be. I know that this one is 6 and this one is 6, for example. So each element you add, for example, has its own styling. It's got margin, padding, and a lot of these you need to know before you get started, but the rest you can figure out as you go along. Webflow makes it pretty easy to design the responsive versions. Once you're done with this, you click tablet, and now all the styling changes you make, for example, I want to bump this margin up a little bit. So what I would do is maybe reduce the bottom margin and increase the top. And I've created style classes so that this changes I make to one element reflect across all. So all the changes I make to tablet won't get carried over to desktop. So then the same way I can do it for mobile, and I can change the layout here and this won't affect my desktop site. So depending on your project, you can get started with desktop, and when you need to, you can totally make the responsive version of it. Now talking about how Webflow's publishing works, I'm currently paying about maybe $12 or $14 a month, and Webflow gives you hosts your site on a temporary URL, a webflow.io URL, and once you're done, you can totally just export this whole thing as code and hand it over to a client, for example. And from what I've heard, Webflow's code is really well structured. So if you're working with a developer, the developer will actually be able to understand the code that's been exported. Like, it follows a very standard front-end framework style. So let me show you what this looks like. So this is the URL here. And yeah, Webflow also has options for hosting if you want to use that. But what I found was if you have your own server, then that's a kind of expensive option. So yeah, this is pretty much my workflow. I design it here. I open it up as a PNG in the browser, so I know what it should look like. And then I get started on recreating it within Webflow.